Kumlen and Ablat Gemara, we are up to Erev Rosh Chodesh Shvat, we are up to Daf Chof Aleph Amud Aleph, the new Pedic. Now, in Mishnayos, the next Pedic after Kedel Mafreya, which is all the laws of Megillah, the next Pedic is Bnei Ha'ir, which basically starts talking about a shul, the kedusha of a shul and the workings of a shul, and then all about Kriyas HaTorah and how that works. And then they move to Hakodesh and Megillah, which is this Pedic here, which talks about the reading of the Megillah and also reading of other things. And the reason why in Mishnayos you have that order in the Rif, also even the Gemara has that order, is because before you start talking about, the Kriyas and how many Aliyahs, let's talk about the shul where you're going to lane and just the general idea of reading the Torah. And then you move to Hakodesh. But our Gemara actually changes the structure. And we start straight with Hakodesh and Megillah before we get to Bnei Yir, because this really follows Hakodesh and Mafreya. We're still talking about the Megillah. We read to Megillah, who can read the Megillah, the last things that we learned, when the Megillah should be read. And now we're talking about how the Megillah should be read. So therefore, the flow on is right. So why Mishnayos chose Bnei Yir versus the Gemara chose Hakodesh and Megillah, I don't know. But that's basically the two possible reasons why. And Tesa Yom talks a little bit about Mishnayos, doesn't really explain the Gemara, why the order is the way it is. So, Hakoire es ha-Megillah, the reader of the Megillah, Oimid, if he stands, Yeshiv, or he sits, doesn't matter. Either way, you are Yotze. Now, there's an argument in Rishonim, are we talking about if you're reading for yourself, or even if you're reading it in a minyan? Because those who say that even as far as the Megillah is concerned, you can read in a minyan sitting down, but it's not covered hatzibur, and therefore, als covered hatzibur, you should be standing. But Kora Echad, whether one person reads it, Karush 9, two people read it, is still all got. It's good, because we learned before that, even though we learned before that in Rosh Hashanah, that Trei Koilus Lemishtama, you can't hear two voices at the same time. But over here, because it's Chaviva, because you only hear it once a year, and we really want to hear the story, so therefore, two people can read at the same time and we can hear it. Argument Mefarshim is the pshat is that we can hear actually two voices, or the pshat is we can focus in on one voice and hear that one voice. And then there's a couple of minutes lahalach. Yot mokem shenogu levorich yivorich. If the meaning is to make a bracha, that we're talking about after the Megillah. Before the Megillah, Gemara will say, of course you have to make a bracha. After the Megillah, if Hadonas Dinenu, and if the meaning is to make a bracha, fine. Shaloi levorich. If the meaning is not to make a bracha, then lo yivorich. It all depends on what the meaning is. Then now we go to Kriyas HaTorah. B'sheni v'chamishi on Monday and on Thursday, in B'Shabbos b'Mincha and Shabbos and Mincha. These are all things that were added on by by Ezra. Koidin, you read Shloisha, 3 aliyahs. Ein poichsim, you cannot have less than 3. We'll see more later why you're number 3. And the Ein Masifin, you can't have a Hisofis on the 3. You can't have a suffix, and why not? The Rashi explains the reason is you can't have a suffix because it's a normal working day, and tircha de tzibur, you're bothering the community. We'll talk later about the other reason that Ran gives. The ein maftidin ben novi, and there's no haftarah as well for the same reason. They don't have time. We're just in the middle of the Mishnah of Chaf Aleph. Ha peiseach b'hachoisim b'Torah. Whoever gets the first aliyah in the Torah, whoever gets the last aliyah, mevorach lefanel achareh. Kriyas HaTorah is one mitzvah, so therefore the way it used to be is the first person who had aliyah made the bracha in the beginning, and the last person who had aliyah made the last bracha, and the people in between did not make any brachas. B'Rosh Chadashim, what about Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaShamayid? Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaShamayid, you're allowed to work, but only if you really have to, the Ravid. And Rosh Chodesh, either, we'll see later in the Gemara, women didn't work at all Rosh Chodesh, or even men perhaps didn't work. But nevertheless, it's not like Shabbos or Yom Tov. So therefore, we have a bit more time. Koidin Arba, we get 4 aliyahs. But ain't peichsim no less. Ain't meisifin no can you add, because the work is still allowed, and therefore to a certain extent, and therefore tirchel tzibur. This is how Rashi learns. Ain't maftidim benov. There's no haftarah either. Ha peseach v'achaisim b'toyda mevorach lefaneh ulachera. The one who starts, the one who finishes, makes the bracha. And Trace already says, why do you have to repeat again the same idea that the first person makes a bracha and the last person, that's it? Because at each level of the reading the Torah is like, I guess, a higher mitzvah. And we would have thought that perhaps in this case, everyone should make a bracha. Then we continue. Zeh klal. This is the rule. Kol sheyesh by musaf, a day that has musaf in it, like Yom Tov, or any Yom Tov, but it's not Yom Tov. So Chol HaMoed, Rosh Chodesh, Kohen Haba. You call up 4 people. Be Yom Tov, Musaf, and it's Yom Tov, then Chamisha. 5 people. You have a bit more time because now it'll work. On the other hand, you can do Melechas Eichel Nefesh. The Yom Kippurim and Yom Kippur, Shisha, you're ready to do 6. As we'll see, Yom Kippur is more significant because Yom Kippur already now do any Melacha, but you get Karas. But B'Shabbos, Shiva, because Shabbos, you get Skila, which is even higher. Ain't Peichsim hen, you don't have any less. Avol Meisifin Alein, you're allowed to add, you're allowed to have more aliyas. Now, big machlekes Rishonim here. I'm sure you go to some shuls and you see that they, like in the yeshiva, they don't have any haysafas whatsoever. And then you have other shuls that have an unlimited amount of haysafas. It raises revenue, and other shuls have a cap of 3. So how's it work? If you read the Mishnah literally, it sounds like that you're allowed to add haysafas on Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, and Shabbos. We see from Aleihen. So there's a big machlekes Rishonim. Some Rishonim say yes, you can have haysafas on Yom Tov and on Yom Kippur and Shabbos. Others say no, you can only have on Shabbos haysafas, not on Yom Tov. And what's the difference? Because they give a different reason altogether as to why you're not allowed to have you don't have haysafas on Monday and Thursday. Not like Rashi because it says Tirchad Tzibur. It's not the reason why. They say the reason is because since if on a Monday, which you read 3 aliyahs, if you're going to add aliyah, it becomes 4. Suddenly you're comparing Monday to Rosh Chodesh when it isn't. If you're going to have 5, you're comparing it to a Yom Tov. If you're going to have Rosh Chodesh 1 more, compared to a Yom Tov. If you have Yom Tov, which is 5, and you add 1 more aliyah, it becomes 6. It's like Yom Kippur. If Yom Kippur you have 6, and you add 1 more, it becomes 7, like Shabbos. We want to have this demarcation clearly distinguished between each one of these days. The only day that there's no cap is Shabbos, because there's nothing higher than 7 anyway. So if you add more, it doesn't matter. So that those are showing hold that only on Shabbos shall I make a suffers, which is the halacha shel and not on Yom Tov and on anything else. However, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Gra, and others say that today you don't have any haysafas even on Shabbos. And what's their logic? Their logic is, when were we allowed to have haysafas? In those days when the people in between didn't make any brachas. The first aliyah made a bracha, the last aliyah made a bracha, and all the people in between didn't make any brachas. And because all the people in between didn't make any brachas, you can add as many aliyahs as you want. It doesn't cost anything. But today that every single person who has an aliyah makes a bracha before and after, you're not allowed to add more brachas. It's a bracha she'ena tzricha. Therefore, they paskin that today you're not allowed to have any haysafas, and that's the reason why we don't have haysafas in yeshiva and other places don't have haysafas. The other places they and the Magen Rambam get down. The other places that do have haysafas, and so on, they learn more like Rashi because the Tirchad Tzibur is if you're allowed to have haysafas and all that on Shabbos, you don't work anyway, and even if they limit it only to Shabbos, but then within that, the other poskim will say you're not allowed to have more than 3 haysafas. The poskim will say you're not allowed to have more than 5 haysafas. And the poskim will say that if it's a case of general revenue for the shul, you can have as many haysafas as you want. In fact, some people want to even say that that if it's a case of revenue, you're allowed to even have haysafas on Yom Tov and on Yom Kippur and all that. It's all a question of how much revenue the shul makes from it. That explains the different customs of how we why some places have haysafas and some places don't have haysafas. Umaftirin benavi, and you do have Torah in the Navi. Have Torah in the Navi is Shabbos and Yom Tov. Again, first aliyah, the last aliyah. As a result of this, as you know, there's a very big argument. Which aliyah is the most chashuv aliyah? Is it shlishi, the first aliyah, and so on and so forth? However, that those poskim will hold that the most chashuv aliyah, the lavush, will hold the most chashuv aliyah is shvi, because in those days the only one who made a bracha besides the kohen who made the first bracha, the only one who made a bracha was the last aliyah finished. So therefore, even though today we decided to add all the brachas in between, and we'll see more later why we added that everybody should make their own bracha, but because so therefore they say the most chashuv bracha is the one who makes the last bracha. So shvi is the most chashuv bracha. So then there's an argument: if it's haysafas, is it still shvi or is it the last aliyah? Anyway, let's continue the Gemara. Time we learned, that Torah is different. That Torah you have to stand when you read. How do you know you stand next to me? Clear when it comes to Torah, you have to stand. Rabavu says, had it not been for this pasuk, we could never have said it. As if Af HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'amidah. Whenever we use a human description of the Eibishter, we use the expression kavayach as if this is where we're using words that refer to mankind, and we're using it to describe an activity of the Eibishter, which obviously is not shaykh, but we say Hashem to stand next to me. So it's called kavayach. Now, Taisa gives you a very important rule. Il mole sometimes means if it wouldn't have been, and imole sometimes means if it would be. And Taisa gives a rule. Whenever it's il mole is written, the last letter with an aleph, we read it as if ilu loy. If not the fact that the pasuk would have written this, it's as if we would never say it on our own. Il mole with the yud means ilu lai. I wish it would be. If it would be this way, then I wish that this would happen. Like Eliezer said, I wish that I'm not successful with France, so maybe I can get my daughter. I'm not successful with Yitzchak Shidduch, and maybe I can get my daughter to marry Yitzchak. So it depends the word Moli how it's spelled. That a teacher should not sit on the bed. There shouldn't be a disparity between the teacher and the students. The teacher sits on the bed, on a bench. The kids are on the floor. He looks down on the kids. It's not conducive to learning well, and it's not respectful. It says, we should all be on the same. We all stand, we all sit, we all sit on the floor. We all have to be on level, the same level. That's what we learned. From times of Moshe to Rabbi Gamliel, this Rabbi Gamliel is the grandson of Hillel. They all would learn Torah standing up, and they had the strength to stand for hours and hours to listen and understand and absorb. Mishemes Rabbi Gamliel passed away. Yorad chayli la'olam. Sickness came down to this world. Everyone had to sit. They didn't have the strength to stand and to concentrate. Everyone had to sit. Behind it now, this is where we actually learned in Gemara site the end. The last Mishnah, the Gemara talks about different great people who passed away, and they were the last of the giants in that particular discipline or in that particular character. Mishemes Rabbi Gamliel, when a Gamliel passed away, he was the last person, Hazakin, bottle covered Taita. The cover of Taita disappeared because everyone used to stand. Now no longer people had the strength to stand. Okay, the Gemara says, one part says, what Moshe Rabbeinu described his 40 days in Shemayim. He said, but I sat on the mountain because of I sat there for 40 days and 40 nights. Another pasuk says, I stood on the mountain. Now, even though he was describing the first 40 days and the last 40 days, but it was in the same place, doing the same thing. And once he was standing, once he was sitting. Which one was it? Amar Rav said, when he learned for the first time, he stood. And when he learned for the second time, he sat. It's not describing two different activities. He was sort of hunched. He was bent a little bit, so therefore you can either describe that position as standing or either position as sitting. The Gemara doesn't answer that he was leaning. So from here, we all the poskim can learn out that if you're supposed to be standing by Shemoneh, for example, and you're leaning on a chair, if you pull the chair away, you'd fall down. That's not called standing, you're sitting. For Raya, the Gemara doesn't answer. He was sort of leaning and therefore sort of in between sitting and standing. It's only if you're bent over a little bit. Rabbi Yechon says, "Ein yeshiva lashon hakava." Yeshiva doesn't mean when Moshe Rabbeinu said I was sitting on the mountain. It didn't mean I sat. What he meant was I spent my time there. Shenemet says, "But Teisha v'Kodesh." They spent time. They dwelled in Kodesh for many days. Rava comes along, and this is what the conclusion. Rakais ma'umid. The easy sugis in the Gemara, he stood. Kosher, the difficult sugis in Miyushav, he sat. And with the Rosh and other learners, and the Eibishter sat with him with the difficult sugis as well, as it is doing with the Eibishter, and he sat with him as well. So Taisa wants to know how come we have enough Taisa. Others want to know how come we have other Gemaras where it says clearly that Amoida was sitting and on a chair, and the students were on the ground, and the students sat on the ground before them. There could have been Tema, and he was saying different halachas. So we find that there wasn't that disparity or that were the different levels. So the Rishonim answer, interesting, that when there's a difference if the student has smicha or doesn't have smicha. If the student does not have smicha, on the contrary, maybe it's better that the student realizes he's not on the level of his teacher, should have that awe and that reverence and respect for the teacher. Maybe the teacher should be sitting on a chair and they should be sitting on the floor. If that student has smicha, which basically means an equal to the teacher or very similar to the teacher, then they should be on level and there shouldn't be that disparity between the two. That's what some want to say. And others answer that even if a Talmud has no smicha, everyone should feel that they're equal to their teacher, so that they should have that kind of connection with the Malamdim. But why does the Gemara there say that the students were sitting on the ground? Because it says when the teacher is preparing a sugya, when the teacher is giving a pulpul, who is the one that has to work the hardest? So he's preparing in his mind is the teacher. And we just said easy stuff you can be in one position, and hard stuff in another position. So for the students who are being spoon fed, it is not so hard. They can be in one position sitting on the floor, and the teacher who is working it through in his mind and coming up with all these innovations and ideas, they are working hard. So therefore they can sit, and that's why there is that disparity. Anyway, says he went further. Tana, we learned, and we see from here again how important it is covered HaTorah, like we had before. That covered HaTorah is like by Mordechai HaTzadik. That covered HaTorah is greater than even Hatzalas Nefashis. Tana, we learned. Mash'ain came but Torah. The Mishnah says Torah is different. You have to stand. Tana, we learned, but Torah also the other difference as well. Torah echad kodev echad metargum. By the Torah, one person says the Torah, and one person translates into Targum. In other words, they used to have a tradition that a person would read the Torah, and then after every pasuk, another person, and there were all kinds of rules, would go ahead and translate the Torah into Targum language, and that other person, and only Targum, not any other language, only Targum, according to many, and the rules, he shouldn't be the Bal Kodesh shouldn't be louder than the Metargim. The Bal Kodesh shouldn't begin while the Metargim is speaking, because it's a Torah. The purpose of reading the Torah on Shabbos is so that we should know what it says. So therefore, it's important that happens. We don't want one person reading and two people Metargim, and two people Metargim, you can't really hear them well. And it's very important that they understand what the Torah is talking about. And that's why you go to some shuls and the Rav would go between, even though it's not the same thing because it's a different language and we stopped this tradition, but they would go between each aliyah and give you a quick summary of what the aliyah is about. Uve Navi, by a Navi, Echad Kodesh, Shnai Metagim. It comes to Navi, one person can read, but two people can Metagim. It's not that important. In Navi, we don't really have halachas. In the Torah, it's all kinds of laws and rules we need to know. In Navi, it's more of this history, and therefore, if they don't hear exactly every word, it's not so bad. So two people can be Metagim at the same time. What do you call it? But two people reading the Navi, that we cannot have. Behal Megilah, when it comes to Hal Megilah, which is something we do less often, so people concentrate more. I feel you can have 10 people reading it, 10 people being Metargum. Now, where exactly do you have Targum by Megilah? Where do you have that? Rashi says, therefore, we take out the words 10 people on Metargum. There's no Targum on Megilah, because we had the Gemara before. Remember, only in Nevi'im they had Targum. And Yonas ben Azil stopped when it came to Ksuvim, because there's Daniel, and Daniel would have been the Ketz when Mashiach, the end of days, is there, and they didn't want that to be revealed. However, everyone disagrees with Rashi. They say that Yonas ben Azil didn't proceed to Targum Ksuvim. But there were other Tanaim who went ahead and was Metargum, everything in the Ksuvim except Daniel. On Megillah's Esther, we have Targum Sheni. My time, but why? Even the Chaviva because they like it, they don't hear it that often, so they're more excited about the story, and therefore they can focus and concentrate, and they can listen, even though a number of people reading it at the same time. Talking about reading at the same time, so all the Rishonim bring here the Gemara we have in Baba Basra. With the Gemara in Baba Basra, the last 8 psukim of the Torah was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Machlekes if Yeshua wrote it or Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it in tears, because it says that Moshe passed away. How can you write Evshel Moshe Mess? And he wrote it. But then it says that a Yachid should read these 8 psukim. What exactly does a Yachid mean, read these 8 psukim? So there are those who say that it means that what do you call it? That you shouldn't have 2 people reading the Torah together. Only one person should read the Torah from the beginning to the end. That's how Rabbeinu Meshulam learns. Only one person can read it. And everyone asks on Meshulam, but we learned the Gemara here that the entire Torah, you can only have one person being a Bal Kodesh. Even though today we have a Bal Kodesh and we have other people who have aliyahs, that's for the reason that we don't want to embarrass people who don't know how to learn. It used to be whoever was called up to the Torah, they read their own portion of the Torah. But then the Rishonim learned from Bikurim. By Bikurim, it says that you have to say all those psukim, and people who were Amaratzim didn't know how to say psukim, they were embarrassed, they didn't show up. So therefore they say, you know what, one person will read on behalf of everybody. Same thing here. Everybody gets an aliyah. It doesn't matter whether you know how to read yourself or not. There's a Bal Kodesh. Somebody who is there, his position is a Bal Kodesh, he reads on behalf of everyone, not to embarrass. That's what most of the Rishonim say. The Rosh says he can't believe that's pshat at all. He says by Bikurim, over there it's a mitzvah. And people stopped doing the mitzvah bikurim, taking the first fruits to Yerushalayim because they were embarrassed. Okay, so we have to do something to prevent that from happening, and therefore to encourage them to come. We had a Baal Koira, somebody read the psukim on the behalf, for everyone's behalf. When it comes to Kriyas HaTorah, says the Rosh, if you don't know how to read, go get yourself a teacher and learn how to read. So you don't get an aliyah. What's the big deal? So it says, so the Rosh therefore says a different reason, or slightly different. It says as follows. What happens is, very interesting, he says, the Rosh says, if you don't know Trup, he says, if you don't know Trup, people are not Yetzer Kriyas HaTorah, which is a fascinating thing. He said that's why you go to some shuls and people are very particular that the Baal Koira should make sure he gets every Trup right. The Rosh says, if you don't know Trup and you read the Torah, nobody's Yetzer Kriyas HaTorah. So what happens is these people go ahead and think they know how to read the Torah. They have no clue to reading the Torah. The Gabbai in the shul knows that they don't know how to read the Torah, so nobody will be Yotze. He never calls them up. They get burning angry. They're furious because they think they know how to read, and the Balkai and the Gabbai is not calling them up. It'll be a big machlekes in the shul. The whole shul will be divided, and we know the rest what happens. So therefore, to avoid all that, to avoid machlekes, that's why we decide, you know what, we'll have a Baal Koira reading and everyone else, reads with him. But the Baal Koira reads loud, but who makes the bracha? The person has a liyah, so therefore he has to read alongside the Baal Koira. But he should read quietly. If he doesn't read, how can he be making a bracha and the Baal Koira should be reading? In fact, they learn from this, some people want to learn from this Rosh. You can't have like some shuls by maftir, you have the bar mitzvah boy saying the brachas, then you have somebody else coming up and reading haftarah. The Rosh says you can't have one person make the bracha, someone else doing the reading. Others disagree and they say there's nothing wrong. Other Rishonim disagree and say nothing wrong with having one person make the brachas and other people reading. But anyway, so Teishes asks on the Bein Meshulam, and other Rishonim ask on the Bein Meshulam. You see clearly from the Gemara here that the entire Torah you can't have more than one person reading. So what's the big deal about this last 8 psukim? So therefore they learn what it means is that you can't divide the 8 psukim into 2 sections of 4. If you want to make Haisafas, you have to read those 8 psukim as one group, one paragraph. The Rambam says the most interesting thing. And the Ravid goes and screams at him, and he says, he uses his usual, pejorative terms about the Rambam. But the Rambam says it means that these 8 psukim in the Torah, you don't need a minyan. Everywhere in the Torah, when you read about Kriyas HaTorah, you need a minyan. But here, Yachid, even if you don't have a minyan, you can read these last 8 psukim. The Ravid says, where did the minyan disappear? What if you don't need a minyan? But anyway, let's continue. The only when it's talking about afterwards, mitzvah levarich. The minig is only about afterwards, but before the reading Megillah, of course you have to make a bracha. Every mitzvah you have to make a bracha prior. All the mitzvahs you have to make a bracha prior to the mitzvah. And why the Ritva in Bracha says the most beautiful thing, or Msachim, he said the most beautiful thing. Because the reason why you have to make a bracha is when you do a mitzvah, you need to get your entire klatz moiseh tomorrow. You need your entire being to be involved in the mitzvah, your spiritual aspect side and your physical side. The mitzvah itself is your physical side. How do you harness your spiritual side? So before you start doing the mitzvah, you make a bracha. And you talk about Hashem, you talk about Hashem Kiddushan b'mitzvah, and we became holy. So you got the nefesh involved. So now the nefesh is involved, you do the mitzvah, which is the goof, either verbally or by your hands, whatever the mitzvah may be. So now your entire being is involved in the mitzvah. That's why all mitzvahs, you need to make a bracha, oivel asiyos. There's a big machlek is if you're allowed to make a bracha after the Oizerua and beginning of Chulin, goes on the Rosh, and others if you make a bracha afterwards, and so on. But in the middle of the mitzvah, if you didn't make prior, you could. The question is if even afterwards. My mashma how do you know the word oiver means? Strange word to use oiver. How do you know oiver means prior? We bring 3 psukim. They wanted to inform David HaMelech about Avshalom's death. So Achimatz, the Kushi was running towards David HaMelech, and Achimatz ran ahead of him and chased him ahead of him. And therefore he got in front of the Kushi. That was his purpose. Similar, the idea of a mitzvah is we want to get ahead of the Yetzer Hara. The idea of making a bracha is to harness our kedusha and therefore get bypass the Yetzer Hara and not give him a chance. So the Kushi represents the Yetzer Hara. Abaye says from here, who avalif name Yaakov passed in front of his family. So the main focus here is on the kedusha and not worried about the Yetzer Hara. And he by the king. The king went before them, and Hashem was in front of them all. Again. Now, why would he use it? Okay, we brought 3 of them psukim to prove that oiver means prior. But why don't you use the general Hebrew word kodim? And so all the Hashem explained, because Kaidim can mean an hour before also. The word Oiva means just immediately before. And in fact, these three psukim argue about like how much immediately before, a couple of seconds, more than that, but it has to be pretty much in close proximity. And therefore, it's amazing that the Rambam, when he writes over here that all the mitzvahs you have to make a bracha before, he uses the word Kaidim, not Oiva. Anyway, so what bracha do you make? Rav Sheshes of Katrazia once came to Rav Ashi, and he made the bracha manach. Manach is Mikra Megilah, and the bracha of Sha'asa Nisim, which is the Nun, and Chesed Shechayanu. Now the Gemara doesn't make a distinction between night Megillah and day Megillah. Not like by Hanukkah, we make a distinction between the first night and other nights. So this is one of the proofs that the Rishonim give, that in the morning also you make a bracha on Shechayanu as well, as we discussed yesterday. My mevorich, what bracha do you make? Baruch Hashem Eloheinu, harabas divenu. This is the bracha you make afterwards. Harabas divenu, vadonas dinenu, vahanoikim es nikmasenu, vahanifra lanu mitzarenu, v'mishalom gmul l'chloim l'sheinu. Talks about how we destroy our enemies, and Baruch Hashem hanifra la'ama Yisrael mikol tzorem. Hashem, defends the Eden, and he gets rid of all of their oppressors. Rabbi, you also say Hakel Mashiach, the God of our salvation. Or the Papa here, say both. We focus on the reading of our enemy, and we focus on the positive. The Eibush is always there to support us. And what do we say? Baruch Atah Hashem, manifli somekol tzedem, Hakel HaMashiach. We say both. Why three aliyahs? Where do three aliyahs come from? Ezra said three. Where did he get it from? Amar Avasi. Can I get Toyin Levim Ksum? This corresponds to three Toyin Levim Ksum. Rabbi says, can I get Koyin Levim Yisraelim? The three aliyahs that represent the Klal Yisrael. El Hadatani of Simi ain't putting you psukim as a knesset in the shul, even though you have three multiples of three, it should be 9. Yet we read a minimum of 10. Where does he get? And he goes by daber oilim min minyan, and even the pasuk by daber, which doesn't tell us anything other than the fact that Hashem spoke to Moshe. Nevertheless, it's part of the 10. Hani asking to me, why 10? Corresponding to the 10 batlonim in the shul. Rashi in 2 different places. We had in the beginning of the Gemara of Gimel. Rashi said, "Batlan means people that are available. And you always have a minion, ensure whatever necessary." But the other Rashi says, Rashi says there that they get the people who are paid by the community, and they get all the provisions taken care of, and their job is to be available to be the minion yidden or batlanim. The Rambam says in his Chuvas that batlanim actually are people who work, and they're prepared to leave work to go for a minion. Not people hang around doing nothing. Rabbi Yosef, he said, "What's the big deal? If you hang around doing nothing, you're available for a minion." That doesn't make any chashuv. Chashuv is if you're working and then you leave your work to go complete a minion. Rabbi Yosef, 10 is connected says a dibrish, and Nemru Lamoshe Messina. The Torah is encapsulated and says a dibrish, and therefore there were 10 dibrish. That's why we have 10. And then some people go to believe is a connected sorry luli sham the 10 halukas, which we had in Masechta Tainas, and we worked out through all the mamadas what they say, and others say it doesn't belong here. What does halukas have to do with reading the Torah? You need 10 psukim. Rabbi Yechonam connected some mamadas, but the 10 saying the world was created, and the world was created only because of Torah. So therefore, it's important the 10 sayings. So the 10 sayings that said Vayemer, the Bereshis know how to teach how you look in Bereshis. The beginning, you only have 9 Vayemers, not 10. So we answer Bereshis Nami Maimaru. Bereshis also is, I guess, not just telling you a story, but that's the words Hashem used to create the world. And how do I know this? If it says Bidvar Hashem Shemayim Naso, Hashem used words to create the world. And Uburu Al Pikot Tzvam. So we see that how did Shemayim waters come about? Through Hashem's words. So there were 10 sayings. Amar Rava says, Rava, now remember you have 10 psukim, and you have to read a minimum of 3 psukim, so one of them is going to read 4. Says Rava, the first aliyah reads 4, great. Sheni go down, the second aliyah reads 4, great. And Shlishi, any one of those 3, in other words, can read the 4, and they're all good. Each one has an advantage. And he explains each one. The first one who reads 4 is Meshubet Nami learned. That you have these new people bring the Megilah shekel, and we have comes and we start using only the new coins, and this they used to buy the kabbalah tzibur or the communal kabbalah. They had 3 boxes there. The shalosh kupesh shalosh soyin should be hand terms alishcha while you kosole on these boxes written Allah Beis Gimel. And why you have to know which is first, which is second, third? Because first they went to the first box. So we see there's a chashivas to the first box. Ladies and menit merishon lahakim and merishon shemitzu merishon. Because the mitzvah is always to use the first box. Where do you find that emtsoi There's an advantage, the virtue in the middle one. The time we learned that the menorah, if you learned that the menorah was positioned from north to south, in the base of Megilah, so north, the south, and so no, it's not facing the entrance to the base of Megilah or the entrance of Kodesh Kodashim, but actually perpendicular to that, north to south. So what does it mean when Torah says that all the candles should be burning towards the menorah? What does that mean? That means that they all faced, 3 on the right, 3 on the left, faced the Neir Ma'aravi, which was the western candle, because the middle candle was positioned a little bit outside of the sink, was a little bit more west, towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and all the other candles were facing the middle one. So we see there's a virtue in the middle one. That there's a virtue in the middle one. The Achra, where do you find that the last one is the most chashuv? You said the fourth, the last aliyah who get 4 psukim has a virtue. The concept that you add kedusha, you don't go down. Papa once in the shul the first guy read 4 psukim. Papa was praised. In other words, whichever one it is, they will be praised. But the way Rashi learned, it sounds like ideally it should be the first one. If the first one didn't do it, then don't feel bad because the second one also has a Megilah. The second one don't feel bad, the third one also has a Megilah. But it sounds like that you should do the first one. And then Rashi goes a bit further. And what he's saying is, if every one of them reads 4 psukim, even better. Ain't poichsin mehem, if you don't diminish nor do you add increase. The first guy makes a bracha. Today, everyone makes a bracha. Every aliyah, everyone makes a bracha. Why is that? We are worried. If a person walks into the shul and and he sees that the people aren't making a bracha, he thinks that nobody makes a bracha before the aliyah. He doesn't even realize that the first guy at least made a bracha for aliyah. Therefore, every aliyah should make a bracha. And if a person leaves the shul, doesn't have bracha afterwards, he thinks there is no bracha afterwards. He doesn't realize that the last person is going to make a bracha. I never understood this Gemara. It sounds like because they read the Torah every Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos, eventually it can't be that every single time, Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos, you walk down the middle of Kriyas Torah. It had to be the once at least the entire Kriyas Torah, or once you were there at the end, or once you were there at the beginning, and then you realize that there's a bracha at the beginning, there's a bracha at the end. It sounds like they only read the Torah once in a blue moon, and therefore we're worried about either the chnasin or the yitzim. I don't understand. And because of this, they made a whole gzera that every single aliyah, everyone makes their own brachas.
Could it be something else?
Sorry?
Could it be something else that because the bracha is made at the start, and if people are coming and going, then it's not tied together. They're either missing the beginning or missing the end.
If they leave in the middle, forget about missing the bracha, they're missing Kriyas Torah.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's a problem in its own right. We'll see more later. I mean, you're not supposed to leave. We'll see more later that people leaving in the middle hardly ever happened. There was more people came late to shul, which we know can happen. But what do you call it? It's the Gemara didn't know about the Kiddush Club, and people would have to leave the middle of Kriyas Torah to organize that. But in those days, I guess there was no Kiddush Club. It was organized after Kriyas Torah or before davening, so it didn't happen. But we're focusing now on the bracha part. And the problem is that they don't know what the bracha is. I mean, I'll show you Rashi. Rashi says here, if a person comes to shul after the first person made bracha, if he doesn't hear the other people making a bracha, he'll think there's no bracha in the Torah before any aliyahs. As if to say this person never ever came to shul before Kriyas Torah. I guess maybe that's possible. And he won't hear that there's a concluding bracha, and he'll think that Rashi says he'll never think there's a concluding bracha. That means this person never ever stayed in shul to the end of Kriyas Torah. Not Monday, not Thursday, not Shabbos, not Mincha. I mean, how often would that happen? It's highly, highly, highly improbable or irregular, and yet we make a gzeira because now we added all of these brachas. Every aliyah, okay, make a bracha before and after because we're worried about this thing here. So it's quite amazing. Let's go on further. You read 4 people. Ula, the son of Rav, asked Rav a question. Parshas Rosh Chodesh Ketzar. How do you read Parshas Rosh Chodesh? Because we have a problem in Parshas Rosh Chodesh. We just said that Aliyah has to have 3 psukim. In Parshas Rosh Chodesh, the first section where it's the first section is 5 psukim, and we have to somehow or another, we have 4 aliyahs of Chodesh. The first section is 5 psukim, and then what do you call it? Then we have the Oilas HaTamid, and then we have Yom HaShabbos, and then we have Rosh Chodesh. The problem is the psukim don't make up. Shabbos only has 2 psukim. Rosh Chodesh has 5 psukim. The first part is made up of what do you call it? Of a certain amount of psukim, and we have 5 psukim. So how do you divide that? Says the Gemara. So Parshas Chodesh, Ketzad, Koyin, how do you read it? Tzavas b'nei Yisrael Martalin Kormi Lachmi, Tahavi Tamne Psuki. There's 8 psukim there in total. There's 8 psukim in total. Till you get to Yom HaShabbos, there's a total of 8 psukim. So how do we break that up? So Hechinava Nikra Trei Tlasa Psuki. If you're going to have 2 aliyahs of 3 psukim, and then you have 2 more psukim till you get to Yom HaShabbos, Pashul Trei, you can't have a aliyah of 2 psukim. And we have a rule, and even though, what's the big deal? You read, give two aliyahs of, let's say, 3 psukim, leaves you 2, but then read the 2, including, and then continue with Yom HaShabbos, like we do anyway, and you'll have a total of 4 psukim. What's the big deal? Because we have a rule, we never leave a parsha less than 3 psukim, because we're scared that somebody will come into shul, is walking out of shul, and he sees that you only left 2 psukim, meaning, you're allowed to have aliyahs with 2 psukim. Doesn't realize that you're going into the next portion, which is Yom HaShabbos. So obviously this person never goes to shul or never hears the whole Kriya on Chodesh. Doesn't realize you read also Shabbos as well. Nikra Arbo, if you're going to read 4, so you completely take care of the 8 psukim, no problem. But then you have Yom HaShabbos, which is only 2 psukim, and then you have 5 afterwards. So you have 7. Pashul L'Shiva, you leave a total of 7 psukim for the entire Kriya. Over Yom HaShabbos having today. Shabbos, the subject of Shabbos is 2 psukim. Rosh Chodesh. How do you do that? You read 2 psukim from Shabbos and only read 1 pasuk from Rosh Chodesh, which is not a problem. You have 3 psukim there, and then you have 4 psukim remaining. There is a problem. But in Maschil and Parsha Pachim, we know that you don't begin reading a parsha if it's less than 3 psukim, and Shabbos only has 2 psukim, and we don't want to start a parsha less than 3 psukim. So you read 2 psukim from Shabbos, and then you read 3 psukim into the Rosh Chodesh. That will leave you only 2 psukim at the end. What do you do? He said, he said to him, I didn't hear anything about Rosh Chodesh, but I did hear what we had in Masechta Tainis not so long ago, how they did the Mamadas, and how they read every single day. Remember, they had to read Agrid Abba Shmuel, which will have the same argument here. Now we learned. On the first day, Bereshis broke up into 2. There's only 5 psukim there, and Yidiki is 1. You have 3 aliyahs. It's only 5 psukim in the first part of Bereshis. The Tanya, I'm going to tell you, you should never read less than 3. We learned. Rav says, you know what? Repeat. That the second aliyah repeats the last pasuk of the first aliyah. Shmuel says pasuk. You take your pasuk and you cut it in half. Rav says daily repeated. My time of why does they just cut it in half? Somebody holds called psukid le paskin Moshe anan le paskin le. If Moshe Rabbeinu said it use this pasuk as an entire pasuk, we cannot split it into half. So therefore we have to repeat it. Shmuel says paskin le. Yes, we do divide it, but you have no choice. He says Chananya says that I had this pain over there, the hard teaching, psukim. The Eitz of Chanina Godel lives like he did not allow me to take any pasuk and divide it in half. Only in school for kids, he said, you can teach them parts of the pasuk at a time. That's the only way you can actually teach them. Otherwise, you cannot divide psukim in half. Says Shmuel, don't ask me from that. Over the why did he allow him to break the psukim for students? Because he had no choice. That's the only way they can learn. Here also we're talking about you have to read 5 psukim, divide into aliyahs. You have no choice. Therefore, you can split the pasuk in half. You divide the pasuk in half. My time. Why doesn't he say just repeat it? Because he's worried. He's worried about people who are coming in late and they see that they hear the guy reading the 3rd pasuk, repeating, but didn't know to repeat it, and he looks at the only 2 psukim before. Oh, you can have aliyah with 2 psukim. Or the guy walks out and he realizes there's only 2 psukim left. He says, you can have aliyah with 2 psukim, and all kinds of problems could come out. And that's why I don't like repeating a pasuk. I'd rather divide the pasuk in half. Okay, continue tomorrow in Mitzvah.